to webinar 39 in the Erbia webinar series, and we're welcoming this morning guest speaker Andrea Muñoz García from the NNFCC. So the NNFCC has prepared, it's done a report on current deployment of anaerobic digestion in Ireland, current state of play ahead of the expectation of market development around biogas and biomethane, which is very much looking to a biomethane, the promised biomethane strategy from government, and then the market supports that would be expected to come from that. There's been a lot of attention on biogas and biomethane in the last year, particularly brought to the top of the, I suppose, the top of the news agenda even. We've had just about this time last year, the EU, due to the energy crisis, brought forward the Repower EU strategy with significant ambition to ramp up the production of biomethane within all EU member states. And then later in the summer last year, in the context of the climate action plan and the challenge around sectoral emissions, and with a particular focus on agriculture, biomethane came into the spotlight and to the top of the news agenda. So very much a hot topic. And we were also in with, there was a joint parliamentary committee last week. So Erbia and members and colleagues from other organizations were also in to speak with the Agriculture Committee in Parliament about that. I must give apologies for our CEO, Mr. Sean Finan, who unfortunately has another commitment in Dublin this morning. So Sean is at the Department of Environment, Climate and Communications Stakeholder Dialogue in the Aviva, or what was Lansdowne. So unfortunately he can't join us this morning, so apologies from Sean, but is very much involved in front of house duties in that dialogue with the department and other stakeholders. So some of you will have been in attendance at webinars, Erbia webinars previously. Others may not be very familiar with Erbia. Just to give it a brief overview. So the Irish Bioenergy Association, Erbia, was established in the late 1990s as a representative voice for the broad bioenergy sector, the industry across the island of Ireland, and working on biogas and biomethane, the anaerobic digestion technologies, as well as biofuels, biochar, including for transport. Biochar, we had a very successful national biochar conference last week. Wood fuels and energy crop sectors. Our work involves representing, first and foremost, representing members' interests. And I mentioned the parliamentary committee last week on biomethane, renewable gas. Much of our key focus of our work is representing members' interests to government and policy makers. Our membership is diverse, so we have a broad membership. We take individual memberships that can include farmers, foresters, individual consultants, SMEs, and then a range of technology providers across the different sectors. Our membership also includes, and we welcome semi-state organizations, semi-state commercial organizations, fuel suppliers, also the research institutions, the advisors from the accounting, legal, engineering side as well. Just a brief overview of some of our projects. We administer the Wood Fuel Quality Assurance Scheme. You can see that maybe down to second last bullet on the slide, WFQA for short. So if you look at, with a particular focus on energy prices in the past year, if you look at any of the solid fuels you purchase, it's worth checking, does it have the WFQA logo on the back? If it does, it's part of the quality assurance scheme that we administer. In the area of biogas and biomethane, we've particular focus at the moment on an EIP Agri project, small biogas demo project or program, which is very much looking to demonstrate I suppose the practicalities and the costings and the inputs required for small scale farm-based biogas in the country. So very much something that can inform and provide learnings to the policy discussions. I mentioned biochar. We also have the 3C project, that is European collaboration under the Interreg funding. And we had the biochar, a lot of interest in that now. We had that national, but almost an international conference last week. And then I myself am leading a national just transition fund project, the Midlands Bioenergy Development Project, looking to basically fill the void left by the fossil fuel closures in the broader Midlands region. So if anyone has any interest in that, do feel free to contact me directly. Our website then, as a landing platform, it is erbia.org, and then we're on social media as well. So just briefly, we were in last week, very much something that's in the spotlight, and we're putting a spotlight on biomethane and biogas at the moment, but certainly for the past week, it's been one of our top agenda items. So last Wednesday, as I mentioned, we're in at the Parliamentary Committee. Very good discussion there, particularly because it was the agriculture side, and we've also been in with the Environment Committee as well. We're invited in there as well. So this week then we are pleased to have the webinar with Andrea and going through the detail of her report. Just as a resource, just to flag it here very briefly for you, some of you may be aware, but if you're not, we have done a range of webinars now, particularly in covering AD, biogas and biomethane. So we've covered everything from good case studies of where Irish companies or Irish entrepreneurs have set up a plant and got it running. We've covered larger scale AD, supplying to grid. We've covered micro scale for domestic and supplying small local businesses, and we've also covered digest it. So that's there as a resource. Apologies, the text may not be, if you're on a phone, you may not be able to read that text, but it is all those webinars are available as a resource on our website. So do feel free to kind of go back again and dip into those. We also, just to flag, we have a fact sheet series. Again, there's one on biogas and biomethane. You may find that useful as a reference point. Again, I just shown a link there to where that is on our website. And our most recent addition to that is on the Government of Ireland's support scheme for sustainable heat. And that's administered by the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland, the SCAI. And again, that fact sheet is available on the website. So I suppose the main business this morning, and again, grateful to our guest, Dr. Andrea Muñoz García from the NNFCC. Andrea is a senior consultant at the NNFCC and has worked on an Irish edition of a report on anaerobic digestion that NNFCC has a number of years of experience of doing in the UK. A decade of experience of producing market reports on deployment of anaerobic digestion for biogas, biomethane and digestate in the UK. So it's very timely that Andrea has now looked to do similar work for the NNFCC here in Ireland. So very welcome to all of you joining us this morning, and be welcome to Andrea, and thank you for joining us for the webinar this morning. So Andrea, thank you. Andrea's on screen there. So we will also then, just to flag for the agenda, we will also then have a panel discussion after Andrea's presentation with my colleague Noel Gavigan, who's our technical executive, and then there will be some discussion and an opportunity then for you to submit questions. And the other thing to be aware of is that this is obviously being recorded, and this webinar will be available if you wish to. There's colleagues of yours that haven't been in a position to join. It will be available afterwards on our website if you want to share the link, and feel very welcome to do so. So again, I welcome Andrea, and Andrea, if that's okay, I can bring you in now. I'll stop sharing my own slides, and I'll bring you in there. So thanks, Andrea.
Okay, can you all hear me?
Yes, Andrea, perfectly, yes. And I can
thanks,
see your
Patrick.
slides. So.
Thanks, Patrick, for the kind introduction. So as Patrick said, I'm going to be talking about anaerobic digestion deployment in Ireland. I'm going to give an overview of not only anaerobic digestion, biogas, biomethane sectors, and I'm going to talk about deployment, regulatory aspects, and funding opportunities available. So I have structured my presentation. I'm going to introduce a little bit about NNFCC for those who haven't heard about what we do. And also I'm going to then introduce the report that we've put together, as Patrick said, about anaerobic digestion deployment in Ireland. And the report covers different parts, different sections, including policy, incentives, and deployment. So I'm going to go over this section in a bit of detail. So about NNFCC, who we are a specialist business consultancy. We have over 19 years of experience in the bioeconomy, and we guide business through policy hurdles and assist in developing the development of technologies and international markets. We provide expertise in the areas such as feedstock, the growing areas of biorefining and bio-based products, and biofuels and bioenergy. We view bio-based technologies as key components of the low carbon economy to deliver economic, social, and environmental benefits. So our mission is to provide the sector with leading strategic business consultancy. So we analyze, we explain, and we de-risk the bioeconomy for our clients. And our objective is to provide information and a strategic view on feedstock technologies, market, policy, and any developments on those areas across the bioeconomy to enable our clients to make informed business decisions. So we offer a range of consultancy services, market analysis, feedstock assessment and sourcing, business planning, opportunity appraisal, sustainability strategy, policy and regulatory guidance, technology and economic appraisal. Our clients are from both the public and the private sector. We've delivered projects for a range of companies, including government departments, but also retailers, producers, developers. There is a bit more information in our website. Specifically in the bioenergy area, we provide, for example, market entry strategy for both the EU and UK biomethane market. We also provide resource assessment and feedstock due diligence. We also support clients with policy and regulatory supporting schemes in the UK, application of the application process and the reporting related to those support schemes. We have also developed a biogas and biomethane carbon calculator. You can find more information on this on our website as well. And also we act as facilitators of partnerships between investors, developers, operators, suppliers. So as Patrick said, for the last 10 years, we've been producing an annual report on AD deployment in the UK. It contains extensive market data, current and future development trends, and it gives an overview on policy, on incentives, and in general, the anaerobic digestion landscape. The report comes with an Excel database, and in the case in the UK, it includes more than 100 entries. They are either operational or planned sites. And the database includes the name, the location, the feedstock type, the volumes, and so on. This is the 10th edition, so we've kind of broadened the scope, and we also talk about composting a bit more in detail, and also we include information on biomethane refueling station networks in the UK. So now that's kind of what we do at NNFCC, or kind of work in bioenergy and specifically in AD. So now a little bit more about NNFCC's links to Ireland. We've been working with for over 10 years with Irish partners in a series of projects. Some of them related to anaerobic digestion and market development. It's worth mentioning the Biobase Northwest Europe and Biobase for SMEs. They were collaborative projects, and they were supporting awareness raising of bioeconomy and the biogas and biomethane in Ireland and other countries. And as part of this project, NNFCC produced fact sheets of Irish bioeconomy and other countries in collaboration with TCBB and other partners. And on top of that, I'm now based in Ireland, so I'm available to explore this market a bit in more detail and meeting people here. So yeah, we've developed this Irish AD deployment database and report similar to the one I mentioned in the UK. It's obviously at a smaller scale, because the sector in Ireland is still at an early stage of development. However, the European Commission recently identified Ireland as having the highest potential per capita regarding production of biomethane, and also the current focus on tackling climate change, but also on energy security, especially in the last year, has led to ambitious biomethane targets both in Ireland and in Europe. And we'll talk about this in a little bit more detail in a second. So the report includes a comprehensive overview on the policy, also in the incentives currently available and the ones that are expected. We discuss installed capacity and anything that is in the pipeline that has had a submitted or approved application. And we discuss a little bit about the feedstock used by the operational plans. So starting with the policy framework and starting with the European policy framework. So at the end of 2019, the new European Commission presidency led by Ursula von der Leyen announced the European Green Deal, and the European Green Deal aim to set as a series of targets to reduce emissions of Europe. One of the targets was reduce emissions by 55% at least by 2030 and be the first climate neutral continent by 2050. As part of, well, those targets set in the European Green Deal were made legally binding in the European climate law in July 2021. The announcement of the European Green Deal was followed by a series of proposals by the European Commission to align the European policy framework to achieving those targets set by the European Green Deal. So there was numerous proposals, numerous documents. I think it's worth highlighting here the Farm to Fork strategy. The Farm to Fork strategy sees biogas and biomethane as a way to diversify farmers' revenues, products, and it encouraged the common agricultural policy to provide support for those sectors. In July 2021, the Fit for 55 package was launched, and it includes again a series of proposals, including the Renewable Energy Directive. The revised version was made legally binding shortly after, and it introduced the third revision of this directive. And then in December 2021, a second battery of proposals, part of Fit for 55, were also launched. All these documents are discussed in more detail in the report, but we don't have time today to go through every one of them. So yeah, everyone I think is familiar with the Renewable Energy Directive. It was revised in 2018, and I think this second directive was made legally binding in July 2021, and shortly after it was introduced RED III. The target for RED II was 32%, if I'm not wrong, of renewable energy by 2030, and this was increased to 40% by RED III by 2030. Last year, it was marked by the launch of Repower EU in May, following the Russian invasion of Ukraine, to focus on energy security and stop our imports or reduce our imports of gas from Russia. So Repower EU has 3 pillars. One of them is focused on renewable energy and production renewable energy. And as part of Repower EU, the renewable energy target that of 40% was proposed to be increased to 45%. And within REPowerEU, the European Commission also thought it was very important to develop the biomethane sector, and it committed to produce 35 BCMs by 2030. As part of REPowerEU guidance, the Biomethane Industrial Partnership was launched in October 2022 to create connection of the different parts involved in the value chain of the biomethane. So moving on to the Irish policy framework, the targets that Ireland set for greenhouse gas emissions and renewable electricity were set in the programme for government. This was published in June 2020, and Ireland committed to reduce approximately 7% every year to reach 51% reduction of greenhouse emissions by 2030, and they aim to be climate neutral by 2050. Those targets were made legally binding in the Climate Action Act in July 2021 and are in line with the ones in the European Green Deal that we discussed before. One of the key documents in Ireland is the Climate Action Plan. Is a document that is reviewed periodically. The initial version in June 2019 talks about mentions biogas, biomethane, and AD, and commits to explore the potential of these sectors and to set some targets for these sectors. This was reviewed in November 2021, and in this document, a target of 1.6 terawatt hour of biomethane production by 2030 was set. Sector then in April 2022, the carbon budgets were approved. This was also a legal requirement set by the Climate Action Act. The carbon budget said how much carbon can the country spend in blocks of 5 years for the next 15 years. And following the carbon budgets, the sectoral emission ceilings were released in July 2022, and along the release of the sectoral emission ceilings, a new target, way more ambitious, for biomethane production was set by the government, 5.7 terawatt hour by 2030. And also the sectoral emission ceilings set a reduction of greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture of at least 25%. There is a new climate action plan released just December last year. And then maybe it's worth mentioning, Padraig also mentioned the biomethane strategy that is currently being prepared and is expected for this year, sometime in 2023. So some incentives in the sector. I will talk in a bit more detail of the support scheme for renewable heat in a second. Just worth mentioning that the government announced the introduction of the renewable heat obligation by 2024. So they announced that last year. There are some incentives for electricity production. It's worth mentioning, for example, the renewable energy support scheme, but this is more focused for wind and solar. The micro generation support scheme, I think, opened in 2021, and in the transport sector, the biofuel obligation scheme. So yeah, the support scheme for renewable heat, I'm just going to go over the basics, but I think there is one of the webinars that Padraig mentioned before talks about this in more detail. So this scheme is aimed at increasing the amount of renewable energy in the heat sector. Is managed by the SEAI and open for applications in 2019. It can provide both installation and operational support, but for anaerobic digestion systems, the support that provides is operational and is offered in the form of quarterly tariff payments and for a span of 15 years. This scheme was relaunched again in March 2023 to widen the scope of the program. So just for comparison, just to discuss briefly some of the incentives that are available in the UK, where deployment is a bit more mature. Some of them, as you can see, are closed because the focus, so initially the focus in the UK was the production of electricity from the biogas, and now the focus have shifted towards the production of biomethane. So the main support scheme there is the green gas support scheme, focused on biomethane production. For electricity, a new one opened recently, Smart Export guarantee to replace some of the ones that closed recently. However, this is not as attractive as the original ones used to be. And now moving on to deployment. So on the map, you can see AD plants and wastewater treatment plants that use anaerobic digestion for treating the sludge. So including both types of plants that produce biogas, there is around 30 operational plants in Ireland. And we know of 3 projects that have either approved planning application or a submitted one. I think since we produced the report, I've been talking to quite a few people, and they were also in the process of submitting applications. So probably these numbers now are slightly different. I think the growth has been quite slow. Only 11 new plants were commissioned since 2017. I think Padraig was talking to Padraig last week, and I think in France the deployment is much quicker. I think it's 3 or 4 plants every week, and I think in the UK only in the year 2020 to 2021 there was in 1 year 20 new plants commissioned. So just to put that in perspective. So in terms of biomethane, there is 2 plants producing biomethane, and they both inject in the gas grid. Injection, there is a central injection point in Kildare, and there is a new one planned by Gas Network Ireland in County Cork. In terms of capacity, the installed capacity in Ireland is in the range of thousands of kilowatts electric. And more specific data is available in the report, and it's worth noticing that most of the capacity at present is given by the wastewater treatment plants. In terms of scale of the plants, what we consider medium scale, a plant between 250 and 500 kilowatts electric, are the most common type of plants. However, most of the capacity is given by a few larger plants, and with capacities over 500 kilowatt electric. In terms of biomethane, the capacity is in the range of few thousands of normal meter cubes per hour. In terms of feedstock, most existing plants can be considered waste fed, and this provides the majority of the current capacity. It's worth mentioning we consider waste fed anything with in any plant that uses over 50% of the feedstock is a waste. And some of the examples of the waste that included in our database are wastewater sludge, dairy processing waste, food waste, and others. A little bit more on waste feedstock. The EPA released a study in 2020 saying that around 310 kilotons of Irish waste was processed by AD, and a similar amount was processed by composting. It's very interesting that in 2020, 27% of this waste was transferred to north of Ireland, and this was an increase of 7% from the previous year. So it's definitely something to keep in mind. Again, just a quick overview of deployment in the UK, just for comparison. In the UK, there is at present 615 operational CHP biogas plants, and the installed capacity is much higher. We were talking in Ireland about thousands of kilowatt electric, and here we are in, I think it's around 570 megawatt electric. And as I said before, 21 new plants were commissioned in between 2021 and 2022 in that period, that 12-month period. In terms of the scale, the distribution is similar to Ireland, with some small, some medium, some larger scale, but most of the capacity, again, here is given by large scale sites. In terms of biomethane, there is 126 biomethane operational sites, and the production capacity, I think, is around 15 times the current biomethane installed capacity in Ireland. So just to conclude, the sector at the moment in Ireland is at an early stage of development. However, as we mentioned, there is a lot of potential. We have been monitoring the market, and we will continue to do so. The capacity is still small in the thousands kilowatt electric, and most of the plants at a medium scale and mostly waste fed. we think the ambitious targets set both at a European level and in Ireland are a good incentive to move the market forward. Over the last year, there seems to be loads of excitement in several conferences that have been going on. The RHO incentive is expected, and we hope all these new developments help developing the sector in the coming years. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andrea, for the presentation, and we'll move to questions from participants shortly, but I might invite my colleague then, Noel Gavigan, our technical executive, to join us on screen and on sound there.
No, sorry.
Perfect, Noel. Thank you. So sound and vision. Noel, a lot to digest there in no pun intended in Andrea's presentation, in terms of, I suppose we've all heard when we travel throughout Europe, surprise that over the past number of years that there hasn't been greater deployment of biogas and biomethane in Ireland. And I suppose that statistic, let's say, or that piece of key information from the EU, that Ireland has the highest potential per capita for biomethane, for biogas and biomethane in the EU, is fairly stark, in contrast with the absence of rollout and deployment of biogas and biomethane plants in the country. So we have, we have the I suppose the natural resources. The EU rates us as the highest potential in Europe. We also have the European policy imperatives. We have the frameworks at a European level in terms of I suppose the policy targets and objectives, and then I suppose that brings our own biomethane strategy then into sharper focus, in terms of moving to a point where we can actually build a market in Ireland. And obviously we were in at I mentioned earlier, just for anyone who's just joined us in the last few minutes, I mentioned earlier that we were in at the Parliamentary Committee, the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Agriculture last week, along with other organisations, including some of our members, including Biocore Environmental, and who run and operate an AD plant, and Gas Networks Ireland, then, who are the grid operator, another member. I suppose, what's the ask for benefit of people viewing this webinar? What's the ask from Arbia for a biomethane strategy? What do we need then within that? Because clearly we have, at a European level, we have the policy imperatives, and we have the natural resources.
It's very clear we have all the external factors are there. We have the materials, we have the technology is available. From a European perspective, it's been well proven. From a feedstock requirement, because of our relatively low population, we'll be somewhat similar to Denmark in that, in terms of our population density and our high agricultural density, we have plenty of feedstock for this. So meeting the targets that are set, we're in very good stead to do that. But I suppose really and truly the difficulty is being, we haven't as yet had the actual government support to do so. We've definitely been saying the right things, and they've set out the right proposals and looking at a high level of biomethane going onto the grid in the next number of years. But ultimately, without the correct support, it's just not happening. So, and that is the critical factor. What we have asked from government is that we have 6 factors basically looking at for the biomethane strategy that government are looking to set out. And in that, really what we're looking at is that that strategy should be developed in conjunction with the developers of AD plants, with the biogas sector, to ensure that it's at the right cost levels. We've experience, unfortunately, in the past here in Ireland, with the Refit 3 program, which was a electrical support for biomethane or for biogas. And I suppose the price came in on that just too low. And effectively, we had no plants built where there was initially a plan to have several hundred megawatts of electrical power coming onto the grid from biogas. It didn't happen because it set the wrong price. And it just wasn't enough to finance a plant. So we can't make that same mistake again. We have to ensure the pricing is right. So we are asking that the strategy is developed with stakeholders from the sector involved, so we can ensure that the correct pricing structure is available. We'd also be asking for within that, along the same lines, that the medium long-term supports to mobilize that, that they do match the cost of production, they do take into consideration the capital costs, but ultimately you're looking at a long-term strategy of, so say for a 15-year period, that you want to be able to cost out the feedstock, that you need to be able to cover the cost of the feedstock and match the requirements of the market. I mean, the gas price we've seen last year went up to a very high level, but that was obviously for geopolitical reasons. We now see today that the gas price has gone right back down to almost levels that we had seen before. They are elevated from where they have been for the previous 10 years. We're at about 35 euros a megawatt hour. So probably it never really passed 30 before that, but it's still very low. It's gone back down to a low level. So that means in order to displace the fossil fuel in the market, we need a high incentive for biomethane, because the costs of biomethane are far in excess of the cost of fossil gas. So that needs to be properly priced in. The carbon, and all the other benefits need to be properly priced in so that we can get the right incentive. There is a need, we're also calling for market certainty on those prices, because you cannot build biogas plants without the financiers being comfortable that they're going to have the cash flow to cover the costs. So from that, you need to have market certainty. So that lends itself more towards measures that guarantee a price, rather than some ideas out there which are generally a requirement to put so much percentage into the flow. But really, we have to see a guaranteed price in order for financiers to fund the plants, because otherwise you're going right down the same line that happened with Refit, where financiers are just not going to be interested in funding the sector, and you'll end up with nothing built. So within that, you need to ensure that the supply chain is properly funded. So within that, there needs to be a fair return right along the supply chain for farmers, for plant operators, and for all those involved, so that you can guarantee a long-term supply. And there also needs to be, this is all a new area for government. It's been well done right across Europe, and there's plenty of examples we can look at, but we still need to look at a phased basis to allow the market to grow and to develop, so that we first of all, the support measures, we can see how they're working or they're not working, and we can adjust them accordingly. We need to have a situation whereby the market, the developers of plant, are able to build up and to ramp up, that the farmers producing feedstock are able to ramp up, and therefore a phased basis would be far better than attempting to build several hundred plants in one go. So we need to be sensible about how we do this. We don't want to make mistakes we made in the past, but we also need to be quite bullish in how we put this together. And then finally, we don't want the biomethane sector to cause a friction with the agricultural sector. We need them both to be complementary, but they're both going to be looking at the same feedstock, and there definitely is a lot of complementary ways they can collaborate. And we just need to ensure that, and that's where having a phase basis and having a ramp up to ensure that we're not going to have difficulties in the marketplace, because the immediate marketplace difficulty would be the costs of feedstock. And we see grass silage, which is interesting to see, that is now going to be a major play within our energy sector, but it is going to be, we're seeing costs this year up to 60 euros a tonne, where we've seen reports, our report that we done a couple of years ago priced at 35, we've seen other reports pricing at 25. So those, that work is now, has to be really adjusted to look at the current market pricing. And if we're going to see competition between, say, the dairy sector and the biomethane sector, what's that going to do with price? So that's where we need to be just careful of how we put this together.
Thanks, Noel. Noel, I might go to Andrea in a moment just to ask in terms of maybe if there are any kind of key lessons from the UK experience to date, that maybe some highlight items that maybe she might like to mention that would be valuable lessons for Ireland in terms of where we're going. I'll give you a chance to kind of look at the questions, Noel, and then I'll roll back to yourself and Andrea for some of the questions. I might just ask Andrea if she would like to come back in for a moment. Is that? So Andrea, I was just saying there to Noel, if there's any, have you seen from the UK experience, are there any kind of, if you were to kind of crystallize it down, are there any kind of key lessons from the UK experience over the last 10 years in terms of biomethane rollout and deployment that will be valuable for Ireland to draw on in terms of the biomethane strategy and I suppose market supports and lessons that we should take heed of?
Yeah, I think actually my colleague Lucy Hobwood, she's online. I don't know if she would be able to chat. She's obviously has lots of expertise on the UK market, so she might be able to provide some insight.
I suppose the key thing, I see Lucy there. I might bring Lucy in if I suppose the key thing is that the market support, that nothing happens without the right market support.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes, Lucy.
You've got me.
I've taken you off mute. You can hear us okay, yes? I was just saying, yep. with Noel outlined what the asks, you'll have heard there, Noel outlined what the asks from Arbia on behalf of our members are to government in terms of developing a biomethane strategy. I suppose in simplest terms, the biggest thing is there hasn't been a meaningful market support here in Ireland. I suppose, are there lessons that you've kind of learned from the UK experience that Ireland could draw on? So from the last 10 years, are there lessons that Ireland could draw on in terms of the rollout?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we have a lot of learnings, a lot of learnings from the UK that we could share. And I think could really put Ireland in a really strong position to develop a strong kind of resilient, robust industry going forward. I think the biggest learning that I would pick out would be long-term certainty and security in terms of the policy mechanisms is really critical. So what we've seen in the UK is we've seen the RHI mechanism, the feed-in tariff initially, then the RHI, and now the green gas support scheme. So the RHI was a long-running scheme. It was in place from kind of 2010, 11 through to 2020, 21. So we had 10 years of that scheme, but during that scheme, there was a lot of change and variability and not much certainty and kind of security for developers going forward. So there were regular digression mechanisms where tariffs reduced on a quarterly, 6-monthly, kind of on a routine basis, depending on the amount of deployment we saw. There were kind of regular reviews of the scheme, consultations, changing eligibility, changing tariffs, changing the banding and the tiering and various things. So because of all that, we had a long-term scheme, but nobody had the long-term security to kind of have that long-term vision. And what we saw off the back of that is we saw a lot of people racing to meet deadlines. So we saw people building plants that were not particularly strategically planned, particularly well thought out and designed and built, because there was always a deadline looming and therefore people were rushing things. So what we've got now in the UK is we've got a handful of I'd say very good plants, but we've got a lot of not so good plants that are not operating as efficiently as they perhaps should. They perhaps don't have the kind of front end technology in place to allow them to have full feedstock flexibility. Perhaps they would have gone for different designs and different planning, site layouts and kind of different planning and permitting if they had time to actually sit back and think about it and plan it ahead of it happening. So I think, yeah, long-term, having the long-term vision, long-term certainty, and actually a mechanism that gives people time to sit back, think and plan, develop, build and commission in their own time, kind of to make sure these projects are fit for purpose, I think also in the UK, we've been very much driven down the alley of bigger is better. The policies have driven that way. So initially we started out with the small scale feed-in, the feed-in tariff and the RHI, which supported smaller scale developments. And then latterly we ended up with the RHI and the Green Gas Support Scheme, the RTFO, which are mechanisms that really support big scale, large scale developments. I think AD is very much about economies of scale, and the bigger you go, the more economic it becomes. But you then end up with plants that really struggle to source and secure feedstock. They struggle to find the land bank to offtake the digestate. They struggle to get the gas capacity to get the gas into the grid. So sometimes they're constrained in that sense. And I think, again, what we've ended up with is a lot of plants scaled at the sweet spot to kind of maximize the benefit they get from the support mechanisms and the incentives. But actually, my advice to anybody starting out in AD has always been scale it appropriate to your situation, and then work on the economics and try and make it fit for that situation. So if you've got limited access to feedstock, scale it around that. If you've got limited land bank for the digestate, scale it around that. And I think that way you would have a technically robust plant that might not be quite as kind of economically favourable, but at least you'd be able to operate it 365 days a year without the constraints that many people are facing.
Okay.
And Lucy, thanks very much. Yes, no, absolutely, because Lucy's highlighted a certain amount of kind of what we will be saying as well, you know.
Yeah, just like there's a huge level of experience there coming from Lucy and Andrea and the association. So what's interesting there is the different support schemes you've had. Would you have any thoughts in terms of whether it should be long-term support or capital support, or what tends to be the best mechanism to work in these situations?
I think what we've seen the investment is available, so the finance is available for these projects. So I don't think it's the capital that's the issue. It's the kind of the long-term security and stability of the sector. So I think we've seen everything in the UK has been tariff-based kind of long-term schemes. Yeah. The FIT, the RHI and the GGSS have been 20 years, and then latterly the GGSS is 15 years of guaranteed tariffs. So I think there are a few critical things there. I think the tariff-based support really works, that long-term security really works, and that's really kind of bankable. So that really pulls through the investment that we need in the industry. On the flip side, the renewable transport fuels obligation is also available to support biomethane, as Andrea mentioned, but you don't get a guaranteed tariff. There's no kind of guaranteed support there, and that's just not bankable. So people use that as an upside once the project's up and running, but they wouldn't be able to secure the funding, the investment required off the back of purely something like the RTFO. So I think the long-term guarantee is really beneficial, and something that was introduced in the UK latterly in the RHI, and then it's been pulled through to the GGSS as well, is the tariff guarantee mechanism. So that means that developers, as soon as they've got the planning consent and a grid connection offer accepted, they can apply for a tariff guarantee, and at that point they tie into the tariff that's available at the time for the duration of the project.
Build in full knowledge.
Yeah, and I think that is really critical, because before we had that in the UK, it was really difficult for these projects to go forward.
Yeah. Okay. Have you seen much on the feedstock pricing then, or how is that? Does it affect it much going forward? We've seen dramatic increases here in the last couple of years.
Yeah,
we've had similar, or what's?
Yeah, we've seen big changes. I think we've seen a real kind of spike in feedstock pricing, and we've also seen quite a lot of volatility, so ups and downs on a regional, kind of local, regional and national basis. So feedstock's a really difficult one, because it does vary a lot locally, influenced by availability and kind of treatment capacity, but also by related markets and kind of parallel market conditions. I think feedstock pricing will always be fairly volatile. What we have in the UK now in terms of the incentive mechanism, so the GGSS, there's an annual tariff review. So there are kind of two sides to the or kind of two ways to look at the annual tariff review. So it's, from a government point of view, it's a way of ensuring that the tariffs that are on offer at any point in time are fit for purpose to pull through the deployment that is planned on the scheme. So they look at the costs, the revenue, the kind of capex and opex costs, and the revenue potential for biomethane at that point in time and adjust the tariffs accordingly. So that's beneficial because that allows you to kind of adjust the tariffs to account for changes in feedstock pricing. But what that doesn't then give is kind of future certainty for the developers and investors that I just alluded to being really important before. So I think a kind of balance there to ensure any mechanism for adjusting tariffs during the scheme is clear and transparent, but also kind of sensible and kind of practical in that sense.
Yeah. Thank
you, Lucy, and thank you, Noel. Noel, I'm going to have to do a whistle-stop tour of questions. So if I can start with you, maybe just I'll try and get to as many as I can, and I may have to group some together. Briefly, Noel, is there anything you'd like to say on grid injection? There's just a question there. If there's kind of a quick, so I'm conscious of the time. I suppose there's a question about grid injection. I suppose we had the first grid injection was delivered through.
Yeah, you can inject anywhere as long as you match the quality and that comes down to just various parameters. But they're basically what they're looking at doing is setting up a number of injection hubs, and you would bring raw biomethane to there, and there may be some adjustment required that it will do before it's injected into the grid itself. So really, you're looking where the hubs are rather than injecting directly yourself.
And just briefly on that, there was when the first grid injection into the national gas grid point was developed, there was an engagement between Gas Networks Ireland and the CRU in terms of the regulatory piece around that, because again, it was proving for the first time that this could be done, so that I suppose the framework had to be put in place around that. Again, I'm just going to try and get to these quickly. Briefly, Noel, on digestate, there's a question on digestate, and again, this was something we highlighted at the parliamentary committee meeting last week in the Oireachtas, was the digestate and the nutrients as a biofertilizer.
Yeah, it's constraints on it, I suppose, the question. Look, it's considered an organic fertilizer. Ultimately, we'd like to see how we can put it in as a chemical fertilizer. There's the way that's handled under nitrates directive and other things, it does have an effect. So you would be constrained by your stocking levels if you're looking to bring in digestate, and some adjustment on that, or some recognition that the fact that digestate, the nutrients are no longer or far less bound up to the organics. They're more a mineralized form, and so therefore more available to the plant. So it's quite technical, but I think there needs to be, I don't know, you'd have a lot of experience in the UK in that as well. It's obviously similar. I'm not sure if you're getting to make any changes to that, but it's definitely an area which is causing difficulties.
Yeah, I think.
Sorry, Lucy, go ahead.
Just to really quickly respond to that, I think in the UK, digestate has gone through a kind of significant change over the years. So we've gone from a position where people didn't really understand its value and its benefits and kind of the practicalities of using digestate, to now people, kind of landowners, farmers, actually calling out for it. It's in high demand. So I think we've seen the market develop. It's taken a long time, but we've still got a long way to go.
So this was a question directly. Thanks, Lucy. This was a question directly to Noel. I'm just trying to track back to it in your initial piece, Noel. It's a question on, I think it's the biogas price that didn't mobilize more plants.
Yeah, it's a question of what was the biogas price? The refit 3, there was 2 pricings on it. It was 14.5 cent, that is per kilowatt hour of electric, and I think there was a 15 as well. Basically depending on the scale of the plant. Now there's also market uplifts on that, depending on inflation and a few other things like that. The consumer price index, it was linked to that, but that wasn't sufficient. We had some waste plants built, in fairness, and the only ones that were built would have been predominantly through that, and it did support waste plants, but not definitely not crop based.
Okay, this is a question that all three of you can come in on if you wish. And again, something that came up at the parliamentary committee in terms of societal, local or community acceptance of plants. What would be your recommendation of optimal maximum plant size for meeting that kind of, I suppose, acceptance of local communities? I think geography is it.
from my experience, the biggest constraint, the biggest challenge at planning is transport, bringing in feedstock and taking out digestate. So I think, again, I always talk about scale appropriate developments. I think scale appropriate to where your feedstock catchment is, how many kind of vehicle movements you're going to have and where those are coming from based on what the road network looks like locally, how accessible the site is, and kind of other road users as well.
Thanks, Lucy. I might go to Andrea and maybe yourself as well on this one. Does your report cover, this is carbon, expecting this is carbon related, carbon capture related. Does your report cover the CO2 market and the total demand of CO2 on the island?
No, it doesn't cover the CO2 market, no.
Thanks, Andrea. And then this is compliments to Andrea here. Thank you for the very comprehensive presentation. Maybe one for both yourself and Noel, maybe on this one, or yourself, Andrea. Just asking, is there any visibility on biomethane being included on a meaningful level in the biofuels obligation scheme? This is in relation to transport. Noel had mentioned about market certainty. Noel, you were kind of involved in this maybe recently. Do you want to say anything on that one?
From an Irish context, but I know Andrea is really looking at the Irish side as well, so I'm sure she's quite knowledgeable in this area.
Biomethane for transport in a nutshell, in a meaningful, being supported.
Yeah, so I mean, definitely it's we will see biomethane for transport being one of the areas where it's got its higher value, and it's a lot of hard to decarbonize sectors such as transport, heavy goods transport. And definitely we see that has a place where biomethane fits in. It's a high cost energy need, and definitely would be more suitable than say using it for heating, let's just say, would have higher value, and it's again a higher to decarbonize sector.
Okay, and this is possibly, just, I'm conscious of the time as well now here. This is possibly something that the person putting the question could follow up with Andrea on. Beyond the webinar, just a question in terms of I'm not sure if this is actually in the report, but if there's any estimates, if the report includes any estimates of the annual costs for RED 2 compliance for biomethane, for an AD site focused on biomethane. And there's...
Yeah, it doesn't include that, but I know we work with we have the GHG calculator, so I'm not really sure if Lucy can add something on that, or if something is every like individual case based.
Yeah, I think we have the tools and knowledge to kind of support people with that the sustainability compliance side, but it's not something that we covered in the report. We can chat offline.
That's what I thought. Yeah, exactly. And so it might be an opportunity, and there's kind of maybe a further piece in it in terms of maybe a concern or a question as to whether RED 3, the RED 3 directive compliance with that will increase the cost. So yeah, maybe something for that the person with that question could be an opportunity to follow up with yourselves directly or bilaterally after the webinar. There's another one there. Might go to Noel on this one. Just in terms of what we've been talking about incentives. There's one question here of the view that it looks that there I suppose their assertion that there will be no guaranteed support and that there will be just an RHO. Do you want to take that one, Noel? Just in terms of what happens, what kind of a scenario are we in if
it comes back to what Lucy was saying earlier in terms of and I was saying a bit of it as well in terms of there needs to be a guaranteed support or a guaranteed price, because otherwise you're not going to get the finance for a plant. It's as simple as that. You need to have a guaranteed cash flow to cover your capital, your capex loans, and the investment cost along with the feedstock. So the RHO renewable heat obligation is where there's a proposal where all gas on the grid will need to have a percentage of biogas in there, biomethane in there, or by trading certs. So that does have potential, but the question there really is what price is that going to be at, because they're leaving it to the market then to set a price. And look, ultimately it takes a little bit longer for developers to put it out. What will happen there is if you're looking to develop a biogas plant, you're then going to some of the larger gas suppliers in the country, and you're looking to set a long-term price with them. And now maybe that could work out quite well, but it just means that there's another layer of complication in there. There's a market scenario in there that needs to be considered. And it means that you as a developer are then going to have to go out and try and find your own price. And it's going to be quite a lot of heavy negotiations to get that into an agreed rate.
Thanks, Noel. I'm just conscious of the time. If Andrea and yourself and Lucy don't mind, I might just go an extra minute or two with the questions, but I'm not sure that I'll get to all of them. And if anyone wants to follow up with us directly, with Andrea and Lucy, maybe get in touch with us at contact@urbia.org. I'll take a feedstock question, Noel. There's one there in terms of cattle slurry, obviously in terms of decarbonising agriculture. Slurry as a feedstock offers an opportunity in Ireland. Do you want to take that question, Noel, in terms of
yeah, basically the question is there a case for dewatering slurry where you're looking at transporting further distances? There would be, yes. I mean, definitely dewatering of slurry is a possibility and has been done in other places. It just you have less transport cost. So I would say that is definitely something that can be considered.
There is a question in terms of I suppose that the person posing the question is taking the view that there's a hold up on government side in terms of introduction of key market supports. I suppose they're asking why. Do we know why? In some ways, if we all fully knew the answer to that, we'd probably have solved the challenge. I'll just move on. There's a batch of questions here. There's one question for Lucy, if that's okay, Lucy. It's just been mentioned directly for yourself. Is there any private or corporate investment in AD projects in the UK? I'm wondering, is that investment outside of venture capital? But maybe
yeah, we see a real mix of
venture capital area, I would say now. Yeah.
A real mix of different kind of finance structures on projects in the UK, depending on scale, kind of location, the kind of driver behind the project. So for some of the smaller medium scale farm-based plants, very much kind of private investment going into those, as well as kind of corporate and project funding. We see quite a few kind of industrial users also developing AD. So we're seeing corporate investment going into those types of facilities. And then we see the kind of corporate, institutional and project finance going into some of the bigger projects as well. So a real range of different structures and finance arrangements.
Another, again, I'm going to have to cut this in a minute or two, so apologies to all the people with questions, but if you can kind of, maybe if you wish to follow up with this again afterwards directly, but again, maybe Lucy, if you don't mind, and maybe Noel might have a view on this as well, or Andrea on this one. This is another digestate one in terms of constraints, but it was directed at Lucy. Are AD plants impacted by the environmental regulations in the UK? So the disposal of digestate, do you see environmental regulatory constraints there in terms of plant operation and size and that?
Yeah, there's a lot of regulation around digestate management. I think the biggest constraint is a combination of kind of regulation and practicalities. So the kind of regulatory constraints limit when you can spread the digestate to land. So you've got a relatively short window for spreading, which means you need significant storage capacity on site or at kind of satellite locations around the AD plant to contain the volume that you're producing in that closed period. You then kind of find the regulatory window opens up. You can, from a regulatory perspective, get out on the land spreading the digestate, but it's too wet. The crops are growing and you can't get on the land. So there's a kind of challenge disconnect between the regulations and the kind of practicalities, I think, that we see as the biggest hurdle.
Okay, thanks, Lucy. Probably something we maybe covered to a little bit. There's a kind of a question around, outside of the gas price, what other income streams we see. So someone's asking about should industrial CO2, biofertilizer, etc., be factored into the business cases? Do you want to mention anything on that, Andrea or Noel? Should, people developing plants, should they be looking at more than just the gas? Maybe Andrea.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually have been talking to people recently, and they have included CO2 and even biochar in their business plans. Obviously, the lack of incentives means you need to look maybe at more different revenue streams. So definitely, I think CO2 could be a good one.
Thanks, Andrea. And I think this probably have to, because we're at 10:35. Unfortunately, I have got an extra 5 minutes, but I probably have to close on this question. Noel, maybe you could help us with this one. The question's asking in terms of the government, what we can kind of gauge from the government view. Is there a preference for biogas plants as distinct from biomethane plants? I suppose the person asking the question is saying that their view is that in the UK, there's been a shift away from CHP towards biomethane to grid.
I mean,
maybe Noel, and if Andrea wants to come in as well.
Yeah, look, I suppose there's a bit more experience in this in the UK than in Ireland in terms of they've developed it a lot further, and they've seen that shift. We've seen it definitely a shift in terms of where policy is pointing, but we haven't seen it necessarily in the ground. We've seen some plants already looking at putting in biomethane that are already looking at producing electricity. But it's look, it's into a different market, and really the incentives there are an issue. Like, we're seeing some of the biomethane going on the grid here in Ireland for trading into the UK because the incentives are not here in Ireland. But I think in the UK now there might be more experience on that shift.
Okay, and maybe just another transport. I'll take one more transport related question, because again, it's in terms of where we distinguish different aspects of the industry in terms of biogas, biomethane, and where we use the different outputs. Would biomethane as used as a transport fuel, so that's in practical terms, that's a mix of compressed natural gas and biomethane for the moment. Would biomethane as used as a transport fuel for heavy goods vehicles help in providing a higher price for the product rather than offsetting against heat? I don't know if you have any view on that, Noel or Andrea.
I sort of spoke a little bit about that a few minutes ago, Park, in terms of
yes.
Look, it's a higher value use for the biomethane is in transport, and it's a harder to decarbonize sector. So it would definitely, in my view, would be an area where we should be looking at biomethane concentrating.
Okay, thank you, Noel. Unfortunately, I'll have to close the questions there because we've allowed a little bit of time, but we have gone over time. But I suppose that's a good indicator in terms of the level of interest in your report, Andrea. And thank you to Andrea and Lucy from the NNFCC. And again, I suppose part of the objective of this webinar as well is to kind of start the conversations and maybe continue some conversations, start more. And you know, if anyone wants to get in touch with us, you're all very welcome to get in touch with us here in Arbia or at the NNFCC on any of these areas. So I'll again thank Andrea Muñoz Garcia, Lucy Hopwood from the NNFCC, and their own Noel Gavin. I want to thank our Teresa O'Brien, who runs the webinars. Thank Teresa for that and coordinating. And I'll just give a quick mention here, if you can see the slides, Noel, just to mention that our webinars, you will be able to look back if anyone has had to go early or missed the start or wishes to share a recording of this webinar, that will be available for you on our website. We also have the fact sheets, which I mentioned, and we're planning webinar for number 40, which would be is being penciled in for 2 weeks' time. So again, thank you all for attending this morning. Thank you to our guests, and we look forward to welcome you all back again soon. So I'll say bye for now, and Slán, and ask Teresa to bring the webinar to a close. So thank you all again. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.